Welcome back again to this A-level Buddhism video podcast. This is now looking at lesson 2, the religious background. First of all, the development of Brahmanism. Here you can see in this picture some Brahmin priests in the top left, some of their deities, and an example of a very extravagant temple, although temples didn't develop till quite late. So let's dive in. The religious background. We have to go way, way back to almost prehistory, the Indus Valley. Now, what's really interesting is that someone once said that the history of India is a clash between Brahmanism and Hinduism, and that's not far off the mark. Even today, the history of India is controversial. One Buddhist, a Dr. Peter B. Santana, who died recently, 2006, I suppose, who wrote a Buddhist text called Fundamentals of Buddhism. And in a chapter, he calls the pre-Buddhist background claims that the original Indus Valley civilization, that's the pre-Vedic civilization, i.e. the Brahmic civilization, was Buddhist in nature. Wow, what a claim. And he says this: Aryan religious beliefs were secular, polytheistic in nature, like the Greeks. Aryan gods were personifications of natural phenomena, including Indra, like Zeus, the god of thunder and lightning, Agni, the god of fire, and Varnam, the god of water. So far, so good. He's probably right. Whereas the Indus Valley civilization stressed renunciation, meditation, rebirth, karma, and the final goal of liberation. And he contrasts it again. The Aryan religion stressed this life: ritual, sacrifice, loyalty, wealth, progeny, power, and heaven. Is this the insider? Is this the insider viewpoint creating a false halcyon or golden age of Buddhism, or is it actually true? That's a good question. And there's some real difficulty here. The evidence to interpret is really very thin, so we don't know what the case is really, but I have some doubts here. Right, moving on. The Indus Valley itself, is he right? Certainly the Aryans were a peaceful, agrarian, relatively more advanced society long before the so-called invasion of the Indo-Europeans. But were they Buddhist? I'm not so sure. Is he right about the Aryan beliefs? Probably. Now, several archaeologists come into play here. A guy called John Marshall in 1931 uncovered a load of artifacts, and he immediately identified them with very animistic practices: mother goddess, phallus worship, fertility rituals, lingam, yoni symbolism, as part of the prehistory to the Vedic period. Buddhism not so keen on some of this. Well, what is happening here is sort of pre-Vedic rituals, cults are developing their own songs that later might migrate into the Vedas to appease the gods, to get agrarian crops to grow. But it's not quite Buddhism, I don't think. So, at the heart of this are some philosophical, metaphysical ideas. What is the ultimate reality? Monistic or dualistic? Actually, at the heart of all of this is pantheism. It's common to both Buddhism and Hinduism. And whichever side you come down on, there's this heady idea, pantheism, that collapses the Atman in on the soul in on God. So by the time of the Bhagavad Gita in 1500 BCE, many aspects of Buddhism certainly are present. The Gita is a political text trying to reconcile divergent varieties of Brahmanism or Hinduism, probably not yet Hinduism. In parts it can be interpreted as monistic or Advaita Hinduism or Advaita text, and so more Buddhist. And other times it can be interpreted as Advaita text or dualistic Hinduism. There is Raja Yoga, non-action present, but it's frowned upon by Krishna. in his conversation with Arjuna in the battlefield. He says it's better to do karma, to do bhakti yoga, than to sit and do nothing. That's a bit of a put down to the Buddhist, I would say. The origin of meditation seems to emerge, in my view, with Advaita ideas in the Upanishads, in especially the Gita, perhaps not that much earlier. It's one of a number of yogic techniques developed. What are the reasons for its development? Well, we'll see that in a second. In the Vedic period, at 1500 or so BC and more recent, we have, interestingly, the development of Orthodox Hinduism proper, if that can be called that, versus folk Hinduism, or the old animistic ideas. And in the Upanishadic books of Hinduism, which develop in this period, we find Orthodox forest dwelling, remember it's highly forested, Hinduism evolves a system of beliefs. In this tradition, we know this, standard Hinduism, we have an Atman, which is part of Brahman, the main force of the universe. Moral actions had importance because they contributed to your karma, and that had importance as it was to do with the rebirth cycle, whether you become an animal or a person, so you need to escape the rebirth, become one again with Brahman. But ordinary people still hung on to this largely animistic idea, still want to evoke good spirits, cast away devils, and had sort of folk rituals and traditions. And we see this tension even in Hinduism today. In the next period, as we move from sacrifice, perhaps we see the emergence of meditation, of prototypical Buddhism proper. The pre-Vedic Indus traditions may have included meditation, but it seems more likely they are influenced by the normal stuff of life, physical ideas. And so they turned to ritualistic things like sacrifice. They had a limited number of gods. This all was multiplied with the arrival of the Indo-Europeans. But there's evidence of a variety of things, lingams, yonis, that precede the Vedic Shiva lingam worship, animistic use of charms, rituals, spirits and demons. But there were no temples or tombs there. There was, in fact, in Harpa, a massive bath, a great swimming pool. It was a site of religious worship, but there were no temples. In the years, centuries just leading up to the Buddha, we have the development of sacrificial ideas. Now, this is probably brought in by the Aryans. We find, remember, they're a pastoral nomadic culture, and they have this larger pantheon of gods that they introduce and they synthesize with the Indus Valley religion. The Buddha and his historical context, written by Peter Harvey, says this. He describes it as an anthropomorphized principle seen active in nature, the cosmos, and human life. These devas could be persuaded to give human benefits such as health and fertility, wealth, through performing sacrifices and rituals. One example here is the horse, the sacrifice ritual. Imagine a nomadic people, and you wanted to be a great warrior. Well, yeah, it sounds pretty ucky, but you would sacrifice a horse to ensure you would become a great warrior. Religious background ideas to meditation then develop out of sacrifice, I think. If you wanted to perform the right sacrifices to the gods, it became increasingly technical, increasingly precise. So the only people you had to be sort of ritually pure to perform these sacrifices. The only people considered worthy enough to perform sacrifices would be the experts or the Brahmin priests. They would have the responsibility passed on to them by those with wealth, the top class of society in the caste system. Brahmins would learn and to practice all kinds of religious techniques and perhaps or yogic techniques, and this would have included meditation along with asceticism and fasting that would, they believed, put them in good stead with Brahman. Some, in fact, and this is where it gets interesting, in order to prepare for these sacrifices, would repair to the forests. Remember, the forests were still vast in that part of the world, in the Ganges basin at this time. And I think this is the key idea. They would have thought of, at one point, of internalizing, turning inward the sacrifices. The sacrifice they would make would be a sacrifice of their own internal mind, instead of making actual animal sacrifices. And here we have the emergence of meditation proper. And the next video, I want to talk about the 4 key groups that were around at the time of the video.